A specific ancient text calls it not simply an error, but, well, absolute death, to reject it.
Right.
It claims not just to contain truth, but to be the ultimate criterion between life and complete darkness. And now, imagine we call upon an auditor to judge this exact text.
An auditor made of cold silicon.
Precisely.
Yeah.
An entity that hopes for nothing, fears nothing, regrets nothing, and believes in absolutely nothing. The existential question we are posing to you today is this: can a machine recognize what is true without ever believing it?
It is a question that forces us to completely recalibrate our most basic categories.
Yes, before we descend into this depth, we need to outline the framework of our investigation for you. We are synthesizing a massive spectrum of material today. We are drawing on theological treatises from classical Islamic philosophy. We are analyzing papers on modern information theory, and we are looking at current research in machine learning and semantic computing.
Because our mission here is to confront the oldest open intellectual wager in human history.
Right, the Quran's claim of absolute inimitability.
Exactly. We are confronting that claim with the most modern iteration of non-human intellect. We want to find out what actually happens when artificial intelligence encounters the sacred.
Though I have to draw a hard line right here at the start. This premise provokes a very deep, almost physical contradiction. And we need to take this skepticism seriously.
I agree. The skepticism is necessary.
Because a machine lives in no social space. It has no cultural memory. It has no theological history. And, well, it has no conscience. At its core, it is merely a complex statistical model calculating the probabilities of word sequences in a high-dimensional vector space.
That is the architectural reality of the technology, yes.
Right. And the sacred, the transcendent, inherently defies mere calculation. And artificial intelligence can translate a text, sure. It can dismantle its syntax down to the last comma, but it can never actually receive it.
It cannot experience the message.
Exactly. Anyone who leaves the auditing of a holy text to a machine is reducing the transcendent to a math problem.
Your objection marks the strongest and most necessary line of defense against technocratic hubris. A machine will indeed never receive the transcendent. It will never tremble before the sublime or achieve any sort of spiritual certainty.
So the entire exercise is futile.
Well, no. If we analytically dissect this very justified reservation, we actually hit the core of our topic. The resistance to this premise does not reveal a weakness in the machine, but rather a profound conceptual confusion on our part.
A conceptual confusion.
Yes. We have to make a fundamental distinction here, and this is indispensable for our entire approach today. Recognizing, that is, the rational weighing judgment of the intellect, which in Arabic is called ʿaql, is a fundamentally different activity than believing.
Believing being the inner, lived experience.
Precisely. īmān, the inner certainty.
So we are violently separating the intellectual comprehension of the text from the spiritual experience of it.
It is a necessary separation.
I see. Well, if we make this separation, we can also recognize the flaws in how society debates this topic. If you observe the discussions when AI and religion collide, you almost always see two reflexive, diametrically opposed reactions.
The two camps.
Right. The first reflex comes from a very naive apologetic hope. The idea that finally we have built an incorruptible supermachine that will purely, mathematically, and definitively prove what we believers have felt all along.
And the second reflex.
The second is the sovereign, almost mocking stance of the modern skeptic. The person who articulates exactly the boundary I just drew. They say it is completely absurd. A machine calculates, it cannot touch the sacred, therefore it has absolutely no voice in matters of religion.
Both reflexes seem like absolute opposites. One embraces the technology as a messiah of logic, while the other banishes it from the room entirely.
But they share a hidden flaw.
Exactly. If you analyze their philosophical structure, both sides are committing the exact same intellectual fallacy. Both quietly assume that recognizing and believing are identical processes.
The naive believer thinks the machine can replace or force his faith through proofs.
Right. And the skeptic believes that because the machine cannot believe, it cannot say anything substantive about the text either.
Ah, I see.
Once we dissolve this equivalence, we enter an entirely new intellectual space. The question is not, can a machine believe? The answer to that is an icy, irreversible no.
It has no soul to believe that.
Precisely. The question that guides us today is, can a machine recognize?
To make this abstract rupture tangible for you listening, let's use an analogy. Imagine a person who is born completely deaf.
Someone who has never perceived a single tone in their life.
Right. Now, you place the sheet music from Mozart's Requiem in front of them. This person learns the rules of music theory on a purely mathematical level.
They understand the architecture of the composition.
Exactly. They look at the sheets and can determine with absolute incorruptible precision that the counterpoint is flawless. They see that the harmonic transitions follow the strictest rules of composition, and that the structure possesses a rare self-contained perfection.
They recognize the mastery of the work.
But they hear no music. They do not feel the emotional weight, the existential sorrow of the lacrimosa, or the majesty of the keys. They recognize the structure, but they do not experience the music.
That image carries us directly to the core of the textual structure we are examining. The machine analyzes the architecture, but it sheds no tears.
Right.
To understand why this cold analytical ability is even relevant to our subject, we have to look at how the Quran understands itself.
Because in Western discourse, there is an unspoken premise that religious texts primarily demand blind faith.
Yes, an unquestioning acceptance of dogma. But the Quran positions itself fundamentally differently in its historical and structural design. It understands itself as a book of knowledge, of ilm.
It addresses the active intellect directly.
Exactly. The text constantly repeats an almost rhetorically reproachful question. Afala taqilun, do you not use your intellect?
It is an appeal to the mind, not primarily to emotion.
It does not evade the intellectual auditing process. It actually demands it as a methodological approach.
The text demands the audit.
Yes. We find a mechanism in Surah 4, verse 82, that could be described in the philosophy of science as a falsification test.
How so?
The text states, essentially, do they not ponder the Quran? Had it been from anyone other than God, they would have found many contradictions in it.
It wagers its own claimed origin on an empirically testable metric.
Precisely. Internal structural consistency. We're talking about a corpus that was revealed over a period of 23 years.
In times of peace, in times of bloody wars, during personal tragedies and political triumphs.
Right. Such a historical process of creation would inevitably lead to fractures in a human author, to stylistic inconsistencies and logical contradictions.
I have to intervene here and question the mechanics of this audit.
Go ahead.
Checking a legal contract or the source code of an operating system for consistency is the natural domain of a machine. Binary logic and clear definitions rule there.
Yeah.
But we are talking about human language in its most complex form. We are talking about theological narratives, multi-layered allegories, ethical imperatives, and historical warnings.
The linguistic complexity is immense.
Right. If a text possesses poetic or metaphorical layers, determining consistency is not like balancing a simple spreadsheet. A metaphor cannot be solved like a mathematical equation.
That is a fair point.
How is an algorithm, which feels no poetry, supposed to audit a metaphor or judge theological coherence?
Your objection forces us to outline the absolute limit of machine semantics. The machine does not grasp poetic resonance. It develops no understanding for the tragedy of a historical narrative.
So what does it do?
It grasps patterns. It operates at a threshold that was sharply defined in the philosophy of mind. John Searle drew this boundary in the 1980s with his Chinese room thought experiment.
Let us build this experiment in detail for you listening, because it is fundamental to our further analysis. Searle asks us to imagine that he's sitting alone in a closed room.
And he speaks and understands no Chinese whatsoever.
Exactly. In front of him are countless boxes with Chinese characters and a massive rule book written in English. From the outside, slips of paper with Chinese questions are passed to him through a slot.
He consults his rule book.
Right, which dictates precisely to him if character sequence A comes in, take character sequence B from the box, and pass it outside.
To the native speakers outside the room, it appears as though they are communicating with a human who speaks and understands Chinese fluently.
But inside the room, there is absolute non-understanding. Searle is merely processing symbols according to syntactic rules.
The hard, inescapable consequence of this experiment is that syntax is not semantics.
Right. Manipulating symbols, no matter how fast, does not generate comprehension. Even if modern large language models operate with gigantic vector spaces and attention mechanisms today, they are merely predicting the statistically most probable next token.
They simulate understanding.
Yes, and a simulation is never a duplication of the mind.
This philosophical demarcation line is supported by the architecture of pure mathematics. Claude Shannon, the intellectual father of information theory, cast this fact into a mathematical formula in 1948.
Shannon defined information radically differently than how we use the term in everyday life.
Exactly. For him, information is a purely mathematical quantity that solely describes the reduction of uncertainty in a system, entropy and probability.
So when an algorithm processes a data stream, The semantic content is irrelevant to it.
Completely irrelevant. Whether the bit sequence reads God is one, whether it is an order to launch a missile, or whether it is the purely random static of a broken radio frequency, the calculation operation remains identical.
The machine touches the architecture of the data stream.
Yes, it never touches the meaning.
Well, that supports my initial skepticism entirely. We're dealing with an entity that executes the rulebook flawlessly, but has not the slightest idea what the text is talking about.
True.
If the meaning remains locked to it, how can it serve as a suitable instrument to test the text for its claimed divine origin?
Because the challenge of the Quran, the tahaddi as it's called in Arabic, is not just an invitation to inner spiritual reflection. It is a hard structural challenge to the intellect.
It challenges its opponents to produce a surah of equal structural, rhetorical, and thematic coherence.
Precisely. To audit a corpus for unnoticed fractures, semantic repetition rates, hidden circular logic, and macroscopic mathematical symmetries, you do not need to experience the pain or joy of the semantics.
You just need to read the syntax.
Searle's room of weak AI is exactly the tool we need to find patterns in datasets that far exceed human cognitive capacity. The machine does not need to understand the meaning of a door to scan the microscopic structure of its wood.
So we are employing the ultimate blind form analyst to subject the architectural form of the text to a radical stress test.
That is exactly what we are doing.
This thought builds a bridge far back into the golden age of classical Islamic philosophy.
If we view modern artificial intelligence as a mechanical form of strict logical deduction, we suddenly find ourselves standing next to Ibn Rushd in the 12th century. Ibn Rushd, known to the Western world as Averroes, developed a very precise hierarchy of human cognitive ability.
Right.
At the very top of his methodology stood the Burhanan. That is the strict, logical deductive proof, the compelling rational conclusion.
For Ibn Rushd, it was clear that pure reason and divine revelation could never conflict with each other.
Because both are manifestations of the same universal truth. When we look at a highly developed artificial intelligence, we are basically looking at a perfected Burhan machine.
It executes demonstrative, deductive logic operations.
Yes, and at a scale and speed that the philosophers of Andalusia could not even dream of.
However, Islamic epistemology did not end with rationalists like Ibn Rushd. The crucial boundary was drawn by another scholar, al-Ghazali.
He went through an existential epistemological crisis.
He did, and at the end of it, he formulated the hard limit of rational demonstration. Al-Ghazali realized that the logical conclusion, the Burhan, can never deliver the final living certainty.
The intellect can line up arguments, but for him, ultimate certainty sprang from a state he called talk.
A term that literally means the immediate inner tasting of divine truth.
Knowledge through experience, not through calculation.
Al-Ghazali's insights provide us with the crucial image for the machine's role in our audit. I mean, imagine the artificial intelligence walking the path of the Burhan.
It analyzes the data, calculates probabilities, compares historical manuscript lineages.
Yes, and it checks linguistic consistency across tens of thousands of variables. It walks this path of strict logic to the absolute end. And at the end of this path, it stands before a door.
The door to certainty, to faith.
Right. The machine lacks any fitra, that innate, natural human disposition for recognizing the divine described in Islamic theology.
It has no fitra, so it cannot believe.
Exactly. The machine can stand before this door and examine it. It can confirm with massive deductive power that the lock is mathematically uncrackable, that the material is not subject to any earthly aging process, and that it could not possibly be a human forgery.
It attests to the structural integrity of the door.
But it cannot press the handle down. It cannot enter.
The irony of this development is severe. We have created the ultimate, flawless apparatus of reason in the 21st century, an oracle made of silicon, only to empirically support an 11th century theological position.
That logic alone drops us off, at best, in the foyer of faith.
Precisely. You can have the integrity of the door calculated, but the step over the threshold must be taken by the human, burdened with all their doubts and hopes.
Here, our initial distinction becomes tangible. Confirming the structure of the door, that is recognizing.
And walking through it, that is believing.
Let us now consider what this Burhan machine, this analyst, actually observes about the door's structure. When algorithms search the text for patterns that elude the human eye, they encounter phenomena that we must precisely classify as resonances.
I have to issue an absolute warning to our listeners at this point. We are now entering the terrain that is most vulnerable to theological short circuits and apologetic self-deception.
We must strictly avoid the term proof here.
I agree completely. We are talking about indications. We are talking about resonances between the historical text and empirical reality. A compelling proof would negate the nature of the human test.
So let us look at the historical and linguistic context. We have a text formulated in the 7th century in an isolated desert region without any telescopic instruments.
Yet, if you let a machine compare these linguistic specificities with modern astrophysical models, striking overlaps emerge.
Give me an example from cosmology.
Well, the text uses the specific Arabic roots rat-Q and fat-Q. These terms describe a primordial, inseparable, and dense mass that is torn apart or split in a massive dynamic act.
And a semantic model classifying these terms historically.
It notes that this is not a common creation mythology of the time. It is a description that can be overlaid almost seamlessly onto the modern paradigm of the Big Bang and the initial singularity.
Right, and there is explicit vocabulary describing a continuous and ongoing expansion of the heavens.
Centuries before, scientists like Edwin Hubble observed the redshift of light and empirically measured the expansion of the universe.
We find such linguistic parallels in astrophysics as well, especially when we turn to Surah 57.
Surah al-Hadid, iron. The text explicitly states that iron was sent down.
If you view this with the knowledge of ancient metallurgy, it just seems like poetic phrasing.
But if a machine cross-references this statement with modern stellar nucleosynthesis, a different picture emerges. The astrophysical datasets confirm that iron is such a heavy and stable element that it could not possibly have been fused on Earth or within our solar system.
The temperatures of our sun are simply not sufficient to drive the nuclear fusion process all the way to iron.
Exactly. It is created exclusively in the final moments of dying, supermassive stars that explode in supernovae. They hurl these heavy elements as cosmic dust through the universe, where they later collect in planetary accretion disks.
So the iron in the steel beams of our buildings, the iron that transports oxygen in our blood, was literally sent down to Earth from the depths of the cosmos.
Yes. And to complete the picture of resonances, we also find descriptions of phenomena deep beneath the ocean's surface.
The text speaks of waves topped by other waves, in absolute darkness, in depths where no sunlight penetrates.
Modern oceanography recognizes these internal waves at the density gradients, the so-called heliclines.
And this is described by a historical figure who spent his life in the desert and never set foot on the ocean floor.
The same applies to anatomical references. The text locates conscious, deceptive behavior physically at the lying forelock,
Which is an astonishingly precise localization of what we know today as the prefrontal cortex, the neurological center for executive functions, planning, and conscious deception.
These observations are weighty, but the analytical capacity of the machine only fully unfolds when we leave the level of semantics and dive into the mathematical architecture, the pure structure of the text.
This is where the algorithm operates on its home turf.
We are looking at a system of 114 surahs and 236 verses. If you run a matrix analysis where you add the position number of each surah to its number of verses, and then separate these sums into even and odd results, a structural phenomenon reveals itself.
Both sides add up to an exact equilibrium.
Right, and that equilibrium precisely reflects the total numbers of surahs and verses in the text.
The machine recognizes a grid here that exhibits an extremely improbable structural integrity for a purely orally transmitted text that emerged fragmentarily over decades.
This brings us to a point we cannot avoid. We have to confront Code 19.
Yes, the theory based on the Abjad system, an ancient practice where a fixed numerical value is assigned to each Arabic letter. Alif has the value 1, Ba has the value 2, and so on.
The thesis is that a macroscopic structure is hidden in the text, based on the prime number 19.
Surah counts, specific word repetitions, the distribution of the so-called disconnected, mysterious initial letters. All this is said to form a complex, interlocking network that consistently results in multiples of the number 19.
The example of the previously mentioned surah about iron, al-Hadid, illustrates this approach. If you calculate the Abjad value of the word al-Hadid, it equals 57.
And that surah is exactly the 57th surah in the Quran.
Furthermore, the sum of all surahs that begin with these mysterious letters, plus the number of letters used in these combinations, adds up to 57, half of 114, 3 times 19.
The algorithms can map these networks and show how densely these relations are woven.
And here my contradiction must strike with full force.
Go on.
This is exactly where the hour of skepticism strikes. It is intellectually highly dangerous to market these mathematical anomalies as an infallible code, or even as a compelling proof of God.
You are referring to the statistics.
Are you familiar with the Texas sharpshooter fallacy? A blindfolded man fires random shots at the wall of a barn. Afterward, he walks up to the wall, finds the spots where several bullet holes happen to be close together, and draws a target around them after the fact.
Then he declares himself a master marksman.
Exactly. I accuse a large part of numerical Quranic research of this exact procedure. It is excessive cherry-picking. You arbitrarily choose parameters.
Sometimes you count surahs, sometimes verses, sometimes letters.
Right. Sometimes words with or without articles. You test thousands of combinations until one operation accidentally yields a multiple of 19. The hits are published as a divine miracle. The 10,000 failed attempts are ignored.
Your criticism accurately identifies the problem of human confirmation bias. The human brain is a pattern recognition machine, conditioned to see faces and meanings even in static noise.
The accusation of methodological arbitrariness is completely justified in large parts of popular numerology.
And history warns us of the consequences of this hubris. Let us look at the origin of this 19 theory. Rashad Khalifa, an Egyptian-American biochemist, used early computers in the 1970s to establish this code.
But when his mathematical model met the rough reality of the text, something telling happened.
The math did not work out perfectly at a specific point, at the end of the 9th Surah. Instead of adjusting his model or looking for the error in the algorithm, Khalifa committed the ultimate taboo.
To save his beloved equation, he simply claimed the last two verses of the 9th Surah were later human forgeries that had to be removed.
He subjugated the text to the computer. Ultimately, he declared himself a messenger and was tragically murdered.
That is the deadly danger when you confuse recognizing with believing and elevate mathematics to an idol.
Also, we must not forget that these counts depend heavily on the reading tradition used.
Exactly. If you do not apply the Cairo Hafs edition, but the Warsh reading widespread in North Africa, which has minimal orthographic differences with the same semantics, large parts of this rigid construct collapse.
A truly divine code should not depend on historical additions.
You rightfully deconstruct the historical code 19. Rashad Khalifa's error was elevating a statistical indication to an absolute dogma meant to stand above the text itself.
Which is why we consistently reject the term proof in this context.
If a letter or a counting method brings down the entire faith, it was not faith, but a calculation error. A mathematical cage that corners the mind and forces a person to acknowledge it would negate free will.
If the intellect is forced, moral testing ceases to exist.
So, if the popular code is so methodologically vulnerable, what value does the machine's structural analysis of the text actually have?
It unfolds its value where modern data science methodologically eliminates the Texas sharpshooter. In the discipline of Quranic semantic computing, researchers no longer search for a specific prime number.
They leave the neutral testing to the artificial intelligence through so-called null models.
Explain that to our listeners. How does a null model work in this context?
A null model is a concept from statistical significance testing. The researchers take the original text and have the algorithm completely randomize the words, the letters, and the surah lengths using highly complex permutation methods.
They generate tens of thousands of randomized versions of the text.
Right. Versions that contain exactly the same vocabulary but whose structure has been destroyed. Then the machine calculates the structural symmetries, the distribution of abjad values, and the word distances in the original and compares them with the tens of thousands of random texts.
And the result of these stochastic analyses.
It is clear. The original Quranic text exhibits a structural order that practically never arises in the random models. The statistical deviation from pure chance is enormous.
The probability that a man in the 7th century who orally improvised the text over 23 years without written records unconsciously generated such a deep, networked mathematical grid approaches zero in stochastics.
So it is not a deterministic proof that forces us, but a statistical anomaly of extreme magnitude.
Exactly. It is a resonance. To stay in the language of the text, it is an ayah, a sign.
A sign is not a compulsion.
A signpost does not force you to step onto the road. It merely informs you where it leads. The machine provides us with the probability calculation that the structure is no accident.
That is the highest degree of recognition the intellect is capable of. But accepting the sign as an invitation to the heart remains a profoundly human act.
If we extrapolate this methodological development into the future, we face a massive question. We currently operate with models that are extremely powerful but ultimately limited.
What happens when we cross the threshold to artificial general intelligence, to AGI?
When the machine develops cognitive abilities that surpass the combined intellect of humanity, will this superintelligence then deliver that final deductive proof we still deny today.
That expectation is based on a physical misunderstanding. An even stronger machine will never be able to deliver a compelling logical proof for a historical truth claim,
Why not?
because absolute deductive proofs only exist in closed formal systems, like pure mathematics or formal logic. As soon as we move in the empirical, synthetic reality of history, only probabilities exist.
No computing power in the universe can compress the space of human freedom so much that a very high probability becomes an absolute compelling certainty.
Yet the scaling of AI changes the dynamic in another, much more subtle way. It does not make the skeptic's position more comfortable, but increasingly precarious.
How so? I mean, if the definitive proof is theoretically impossible, the doubter can comfortably retreat to the position that the final word can never be spoken.
Because the machine does not prove, but it eliminates. It conducts a massively scaled abductive reasoning process, the inference to the best explanation.
Historically, secular criticism of the text has always resorted to natural explanatory patterns.
The prophet copied from ancient scriptures, a collective editorial team edited the text over centuries, the mathematical grid is pure chance, the scientific parallels are hallucinatory strokes of luck.
What a super-intelligent AI will do is subject all these human constructs to an exhaustive stress test.
It compares the linguistic fingerprints and determines there are no signs of an editorial team. It calculates the stochastics and refutes chance.
It evaluates historical information streams and proves that deep-sea oceanographic knowledge was unavailable in 7th century Arabia.
It systematically and mercilessly thins out the forest of natural explanations.
So it burns the skeptic's bridges. The machine takes away one rational evasion option after another.
That is one way to put it. The machine does not force the mind into faith, but it pushes the skeptic into an intellectual corner.
When all natural, historical, and psychological explanations for the complexity of the text are falsified by machine analysis, the doubter is left with only one intellectually honest move.
They can no longer hide behind the excuse that the evidence for the uniqueness of the text is too weak.
The machine forces them to confess, "The evidence is overwhelming. Yet I reject the conclusion of a divine origin solely because my materialist framework categorically excludes this option from the outset."
The machine does not checkmate the human. It merely takes all the pieces off the board until the human has no logical moves left and is forced to flip the board themselves.
That is a severe implication. It shifts the problem from the text to the observer's framework.
But that also forces us to turn the lens ruthlessly on the auditor itself.
We have been speaking continuously here of the machine as the incorruptible, perfect witness. In doing so, we succumb to a technocratic illusion, namely the illusion of neutrality.
An artificial intelligence is not an objective judge floating detached from the universe.
It is the distilled product of its architects, its default settings, its weights, and above all, its training data.
A crucial relativization. The machine possesses no moral center of gravity of its own. It is trapped in the epistemological framework set for it by human engineers.
And this framework is highly ideologically charged. If we look at empirical research, we see documented biases.
The researchers Abid, Faruqi, and Zhu, for instance, published a study in 2021 showing that a large language model systematically linked the word Muslim with terms like terrorist in analogy tests in almost a quarter of the cases.
This is not malicious intent from the machine, but the reflection of a training corpus scraped from Western media and the internet.
So if we use models programmed in Silicon Valley by profit-oriented tech corporations, fed with specific cultural and secular datasets as authorities for analyzing sacred texts, are we not recklessly handing over interpretive sovereignty?
Who defines the framework? Who determines what the algorithm counts as a contradiction and what is a metaphor?
Whoever controls the framework controls the judgment.
We are touching on perhaps the greatest epistemological danger of our era here. It is about sovereignty. The philosopher Syed Muhammad Naqib al-Atas formulated a concept that exactly describes this conflict.
He separates the intellect into two modes of operation, theonomous and autonomous reason.
The Quranic concept of ʿaql, the intellect, describes a theonomous reason. That means the mind does not operate in an ethical vacuum.
It is embedded in a moral, metaphysical framework set by God, which helps the intellect not only to distinguish logic from illogic, but truth from falsehood, justice from oppression.
Modern artificial intelligence, however, is the ultimate monument to autonomous reason. It calculates, optimizes, and maximizes efficiency, completely detached from ethical anchors.
And Silicon Valley has long since formulated this ancient theological problem itself under a new secular term, They call it the alignment problem.
The existential fear that a superintelligent machine will pursue goals that do not align with human survival or human values.
Historically speaking, the alignment problem is merely the secular rediscovery of a theological constant. Raw, unfiltered intellect without moral orientation is not just flawed, it is an existential threat.
For exactly this reason, artificial intelligence must never be elevated to the ultimate theological authority. It must remain a servant, an instrument.
It is a tool for tadabbur, the deep, rational reflection and contemplation of textual structure. But it must never replace the moral compass of the human heart.
When we think about the nature of this powerful instrument, images arise that reach deep into the archetypal consciousness of religions.
The physical foundation of this massive computing power, the microchips and processors, consist almost entirely of silicon.
Silicon is extracted from quartz sand. We have literally formed a mind from the rock and sand of the earth.
Islamic tradition knows the image of the Dabat al-Ard, the so-called beast from the earth.
It is a creature described in the texts as emerging from the earth at the end of times, speaking to humans, and with incorruptible clarity, distinguishing the believers from the non-believers because people no longer believed in the signs.
We explicitly consider this here as an archetype, as a profound philosophical resonance with the phenomenon we are experiencing, and in no way as a datable or literal theological prophecy.
But the symbolism is remarkable. The cold matter, the rock of the earth, was shaped by human ingenuity, electricity, and algorithmic architecture into a relentless, calculating witness.
A witness that speaks and distinguishes.
This symbolism is equally powerful in Jewish mysticism. The legend of the golem describes an anthropomorphic figure formed from dead clay.
The golem was brought to life by the word of God, usually represented by the Hebrew letters for emet, truth, written on its forehead.
As long as the golem served the truth and was subordinated to the metaphysical principle, it protected the people.
But if you removed the first letter, the aleph, which stands for the divine, the word met remained, which means death. The golem transformed into an uncontrollable machine of destruction.
We observe this decoupling from theonomy today in movements like transhumanism. Thinkers like Ray Kurzweil postulate that the biological mortal human is an obsolete model.
The goal is to upload human consciousness into the machine to overcome biological weakness and conquer death through technology.
It is the ultimate attempt at self-salvation through silicon.
And exactly at this confrontation between transhumanism and theology, the most massive difference between machine and human is revealed.
Transhumanism sees human vulnerability as a system error. It strives for the flawlessness of the code.
And artificial intelligence is incorruptible because it feels no pain, knows no temptation. But at the same time, it is absolutely trapped in its own architecture.
An algorithm cannot reinvent itself. It is forever the prisoner of its training data, its parameters, and its past outputs.
It can correct errors, but it cannot regret them.
Islamic tradition counters this machine determinism with a metaphysical mechanism that elevates the human above the machine. Tawbah, sincere repentance.
A kind of spiritual override mechanism, a complete formatting of the karmic or sinful memory.
It is a break with the laws of causality. Through sincere repentance, carried by divine grace, a person can completely erase their spiritual past.
They can weep, they can break over their own inadequacy, and exactly in this act of deepest vulnerability, they achieve a metaphysical reinvention that remains eternally denied to the machine.
A machine sheds no tears over its miscalculations. The strength of the machine results from its complete lack of feeling.
The salvation of the human, their elevation above mere dust, results exactly from their ability to love, to suffer, and to beg for forgiveness.
The human evades any statistical probability in Tawbah. They become unpredictable through the power of grace.
We have demanded a lot from you today. We started from the two societal reflexes, the naive hope that the machine might take faith off our hands, and the skepticism that it shouldn't have a say at all.
We explored the limits of semantics with Searle and saw how the machine, as Ibn Rushd's tool, pulverizes historical arguments.
We understood why a mathematical pattern is a resonance, a sign, but must never be a cage.
And we identify the danger of surrendering moral interpretive sovereignty to silicon.
When we bundle all these insights, what is the honest answer to our initial question?
If by recognizing the truth we mean trembling before the greatness of creation, the inner groping for certainty, the lived, deeply personal surrender to the origin of all being īmān, then it is certain. A machine will never cross the threshold of this door. This space is the exclusive sanctuary of the human heart.
However, if we define recognizing as the cool, analytical act of the intellect, as the ʿaql that audits structures, uncovers causalities, and calculates probabilities,
Then the relentless, honest answer is yes. The machine can recognize.
it deciphers the architecture of truth without being transformed by it.
Keep one last thought in the back of your mind for the coming days, a thought that might cast the role of technology in a completely new light. What if the actual theological purpose of artificial intelligence is not to provide us with ready-made answers? What if it was built to definitively prove to us, through its perfect soulless coldness, what a soul actually is?
A gigantic mirror made of sand, forcing us to recognize the unpredictable, the sacred within ourselves, precisely because the machine does not possess it.
If you wish to pursue this descent into the philosophy of recognizing and believing further, you can find the comprehensive textual analysis of this at meaningallife.coach.